We begin with Oxford United. What grade have you given them, Justin?
I've gone with A.
I've gone with A as well. Why have you gone with an A?
I think Oxford had the toughest hand out of any team in the Championship last season. They had a small budget. That's obvious. The pull of the club is very limiting. Again, that's obvious. So they had to be smart with how they recruited. They went up via the playoffs the season before. So you're automatically a month behind everyone else planning-wise. And they lost Josh Murphy, who went to Portsmouth and had an incredible season. Then there's the context of the season. They felt down and out under Des Buckingham once he left. And then Gary Rowett comes in and delivers what I think is probably just short of a miracle. And then guiding them to a very comfortable Championship finish. So for me, Oxford, A. A.
Miracle feels like a strong word, but I certainly understand the sentiment. I think Oxford may have merited an A, even if they were staying up on the final day. The fact that they actually ended up staying up relatively comfortably is definitely worthy of an A in my book. So that's why I've gone with an A as well. I don't disagree with much of what you say there, Justin. And it was undoubtedly a successful season for Oxford. However, next season, I think is looking very tough for them. When you've got Birmingham and Wrexham coming up, who definitely won't be in danger of going down, I think a team with the resources that Oxford have, they would rip your hand off right now for safety next season, wouldn't they?
Oh, yeah, they would. It will be another struggle. But if anyone can deliver Championship stability, it is Gary Rowett. He is capable of that. So whilst the odds stacked against Oxford, Gary Rowett is a manager I can get behind. That being said, they will need more effective forwards, without doubt, and someone to lift the burden off Cameron Brannigan as well. But I disagree to some extent that Wrexham will comfortably stay up. I don't see that happening despite their budgets. I think their recruitment policy is downright garbage.
We can talk about that next Thursday, just when we do a promotion relegated sides episode, but sticking with Oxford. But
in the context of Oxford, I think that does open things up a little bit for them. So yes, they will struggle. It will be another struggle. And I think that's absolutely fine because you have to take budget into account. But as I mentioned, I'll double down on it. Gary Rowett, if anyone can deliver a solid championship club, a solid championship team, it's him.
Yeah, well, it's easy to forget when reflecting on Oxford's season that there were various stages where they were looking like they were in imminent danger. And then I think if you look at the teams who finished below them, you had Plymouth, who had a similar budget to Oxford. They've gone. Cardiff had been circling the drain for a long time. They've now gone. Then the other teams who stayed up below Oxford all pretty much have bigger budgets than them. Well, all of them have bigger budgets, actually. Now, I know that doesn't necessarily constitute them finishing higher, but that's undoubtedly where they're going to be battling again next season, Oxford, that is. They definitely can stay up, don't get me wrong, because as we've alluded to over these two episodes, there's quite a few teams who could be in danger next year of going down. And when they've got a handy operator like Gary Rowett in charge, that's always a very good start. They'll have to have a very smart summer with their recruitment, but a club like Oxford need to just focus on establishing themselves in the division before looking any higher up the table, I think, anyway. And let's go to one of the teams we have lost this past season. It's, of course, Plymouth Argyle have been relegated to the League One. What grade have you given them, Justin?
I've given them a C.
C? They've gone down.
Yeah, I know, I'm aware.
Why?
The way I would assess things is I think Miran Muslic delivered a mid-table team. From January 1st, they accrued 28 points, as many as Blackburn, more than Middlesbrough and Norwich and a lot of other teams. So with everyone
down,
tipping
Justin.
them... Yeah, I'm aware. Yeah, I know they went
season.
down. Yeah. But I think everyone tipping them to go down at the start of the season. So for them to stay up was always going to be hard. But actually, to have a mathematical chance of staying in the Championship come game week 46, I think is admirable considering the squad they had. That's an important point. And the position Wayne Rooney left them in.
I don't understand C at all, even based off you explaining it just then, considering they finished 2 points above bottom of the table. Yeah, recency bias seems to have very much crept into your thinking there. I've gone with an E because I don't think you can justify a team going down having much more than an E, quite frankly. But whatever. They have been dealt a big blow, haven't they, Plymouth, in their quest to bounce back from League One at the first time of asking, because Miro Muslic is leaving, Justin. And we were saying after Plymouth's relegation that if they kept Muslic, then they should have a good chance of coming straight back up. But now he's off, Justin.
Yeah, look, I think the first point that needs to be made is Schalke, big club. I would jump at the chance if I was in Miro Muslic's position. But for me, just the way Miro Muslic has gone about it, he was always self-serving. Plymouth was always treated as a stepping stone. The amount of cameras that followed him around, the amount of cameras he loved being around him, did make me feel a little bit uneasy. But now it's come to this, despite him making all the right noises, i.e., building for this season, and obviously having those conversations with the club for building for the coming season. For him to leave in these circumstances, I think is disappointing. But like I said, Schalke's a big club. You're gonna jump at the chance.
I think you're kind of contradicting yourself there, because
I'm not. No. Because him joining Schalke is fine. But
it's also not fine.
No, but the way he's treated Plymouth makes me feel a bit uneasy. He's basically just put them to the side, not giving a shit about them. I think that's very obvious in his behaviours. This was always...
Why is it?
Because of the way he's gone about this departure. The club, for a club to make a statement about an outgoing manager, I think is quite damning. When does that happen? When does a club call out the behaviours of a manager? It's very rare it happens. And as I say, Miro Muslic has clearly had those conversations with Plymouth about building for next season. Plymouth have reportedly brought in 2 players to fit that mould, and he's gone.
So that's because a club like Schalke have come calling, who, as you say, are a massive, massive club. So I don't think you can really blame him for that. It's not like he's going to a random minnow on the continent. He's going to flipping Schalke, one of the biggest clubs in Germany. So I don't think you can really blame him for wanting to leave. But whatever, it doesn't really matter because he's going. But what he did last season was good. I think we could say that much. He took a pretty poor squad that had been playing poorly all season and got them competing. It was always going to be a tough ask to keep them up, but he gave them a fighting chance. So now they need to get someone in who will continue that good work. How they do that, I have no idea, because it doesn't seem like they were expecting Muslic to go. So they may be starting that search from scratch. Whether they look abroad again or for someone who knows League One is going to be really interesting to see, but it's going to be difficult because it was looking pretty promising under him heading into next season, wasn't it, Justin?
Yeah, it was. It was. Like I said, he did galvanise the club. He brought everyone together after it became very, very splintered. And ultimately, the timing and the departure itself is going to make the club. They're going to have to almost rush around a little bit. But I think Plymouth are in an attractive position going down to League One to go and get a manager who can bring them back to the Championship. They're in a very good position.
Let's go to another club on the South Coast. It is Portsmouth. What grade are you giving them, Justin?
I'm giving them a B.
I've given them a B as well. I think if you offered Portsmouth fans safety at the start of last season, they would have taken it. In the end, they've ended up staying up relatively comfortably, Justin, actually crept more towards mid-table, which is kind of what we actually predicted them to do at the start of the season. So for them to do that, pretty good going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, after their nightmare start, fixture-wise and results-wise, they were probably one of the teams in the division that was most impacted by injuries as well. I know every single listener who's a fan of a club will say, oh, well, my team had injuries as well. Yeah, every team had injuries, but the amount of first teamers and starting 11 that Portsmouth missed throughout the season was astonishing. Colby Bishop was out for a spell, Callum Lang, Regan Poole, Connor Shaughnessy, there were others. They only had 6 players make 30 starts or more. So there's a core group of starters missing for long periods of that season. So for John Mousinho to deliver a comfortable end to the season, I think is actually more remarkable than many will probably think and say.
Yeah, I agree with that. Looking ahead to next season then, Justin, I'm not really sure what my early expectations are for Portsmouth. I don't think they'll go down, but I would also say I'm not massively looking higher up the division with them. I reckon another solid mid-table season would be a good season for Pompey.
I think it's about establishing. I think the likes of Portsmouth, Derby, sort of Oxford as well. When you survive in your first year after coming up from League One, you want to establish yourself in the Championship. And if you look at Preston as an example, I know they're recently this season they've been poor, but actually when Simon Grayson brought them up, it was solid mid-table finishers. Alex Neil then comes in and they start to flirt with the playoffs. So for me, it's all about making sure you're a solid Championship team. So for Portsmouth, yes, a lower mid-table finish again for the coming season will be absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Anything else becomes a bonus. Just make sure you're not in a position where you can go down, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah, and budget-wise, they'll probably be one of the weaker sides in the division next season, especially with two of the sides coming up from League One. So with that in mind, expectations do need to be moderated. But what we've seen from Portsmouth this past season shows, for me anyway, they've got what it takes to build upon what they've done. You see what I mean? They've ended up staying up relatively comfortably, and they've done that by keeping full faith in the manager and recruiting pretty well. If it wasn't for constant injuries at the back, like you were alluding to earlier on, they may have stayed up more comfortably. But there's a lot to like with Portsmouth. John Mousinho's showing more and more signs of being a really promising manager. They play some nice football. They would need to have a good summer of bringing in players, but all in all, I'm feeling more positive about Portsmouth going forwards than I am a lot of other sides, as we've alluded to throughout this first episode of grading teams, and as we'll get onto very shortly. Speaking of which, Justin, Preston North End, what grade have you given them?
E.
I've given them a big fat E as well. It would have been an F if they went down, but an E, I think, shows how they have managed to just claw safety back when it was looking very, very worrying at one stage. Anything to add from your side, Justin?
I actually don't think an F would have been too far wrong, even in the events of staying up. It's been a complete fuck up of a season, hasn't it? Come on. That being said, a fuck up is a one-off, isn't it? Yeah, this is years leading up to it. Average and below average has become an acceptable variable at Deepdale. And that's not good enough, is it? It's not good enough.
Yeah, and as we have been alluding to over the past few weeks, even after Preston stayed up on the final day, I do get the sense that the end to this past season isn't just, a bad run of form. I worry that that is possibly a sign of things to come, because it seems like everything at Preston has turned very stale. We've spoken a lot over the past 12 months or so how that squad is just full of bang average players at best. And now even some of the better players who they've had have left the club. And heading into next season, you've got a manager who, from what we've heard from him over the final few weeks of the season, isn't very happy about his position there. You've got a club who historically don't spend much money. There's a lot to be worried about with Preston North End, Justin.
I think they are a team to watch next season when it comes to putting them in your relegation thoughts, but obviously we'll expand on that at a later date. It is the question of will they invest? Obviously, they've brought in Jordan Thompson on a free transfer already.
Such a Preston signing.
So Preston. He's a utility player and will be useful to have in the squad, but by my count, they're probably 5 or 6 starters short from being a top half team. That's a lot of additions that need to be made. So yeah, I sit here very uncomfortably when thinking about Preston and their endeavours next season.
Yeah, they need a big refresh, don't they? But
massive. Well, Paul Higginbottom said he wanted to put a bomb under the squad. Come on.
Well, there you go. That goes back to what we were saying just a second ago about what he's been saying about the state of things at PNE over the past few weeks. But yeah, they need a big refresh, but it feels like it's a big job to do over one summer. But they're going to have to try and do it. Otherwise, they may find themselves going down because, as we say, things have seriously gone stale at Deepdale. Let's go to QPR. Justin, what grade are you giving them?
I've given them a C.
I've given them a C as well. It's a bit strange with QPR because their season has really been bookended by 2 terrible runs of form and then right in the middle, 1 excellent run of form. And that's basically been kind of the foundation of their season, really, because if they had that form from the end and start of the season in the middle bit, then they would have gone down, wouldn't they?
Yeah. That's a really important point to make, actually. They were hard to assess because of that flirting really hard with relegation, but also flirting with promotion. It's such a strange middle period of the season where they was looking like they could make a run for the playoffs, but ultimately lower mid-table is where they've settled. And it's not the worst thing in the world. They've got some solid foundations at Loftus Road. I think there's some talented players that do need propping up with additions. But ultimately, I think them finishing in and around lower mid-table after what has been, a fair bit of roller coaster riding in the last couple of years, probably since Mark Warburton left, actually, I think is very solid. Obviously, the Marty Cifuentes situation doesn't help things, but I think them finishing where they have in the table is, again, absolutely fine.
Yeah, it's pretty much where a lot of people predicted them to finish at the start of the season, and that's where they've ultimately finished. A bit of a roundabout way of going about it, but they got there in the end. And you mentioned Marty Cifuentes there, Justin. Obviously been a lot of drama over the past few weeks about his future, but QPR are replacing him with former Norwich boss Johannes Hoff-Thorup, which is a bit surprising. I thought we would never see him again, and he would end up being an answer to a very obscure quiz question at some point. But what do you think of that, Justin?
I don't think it's the worst appointment in the world. I think what we saw at Norwich at times were, the potential for a very good squad, and I think he probably fits the same mould that Marty Cifuentes fits, in that, he wants to play a certain brand of football. The squad might limit that, so it's all about adapting to what his squad's capable of. But I think with Thorup, I know you were not a fan at all of Norwich this season. I don't think it's as bad as probably how you might make out. And I do think Thorup was probably harshly dealt with at Norwich. I think another season was needed, or at least a couple of months into the new season was needed to really assess where he's at. But I think him going into QPR, I think it's a little bit of a coup. I really do. Because he came to Norwich with a big reputation, wasn't able to really deliver on that, so he's got another chance here.
Well, even though I have been very critical of Norwich this past season, because I believe they have massively underachieved, I think Thorup can be a very good manager, because I was very hot on that appointment when it happened. I think, going back to what you were just saying, I think the majority of what's gone wrong this season for Norwich is to do with their recruitment, mainly, because pretty much every player they've signed this past season hasn't really kicked on at all. Now, Thorup definitely still has a lot to learn as a coach, particularly with game management, because Norwich dropped a criminal number of points from winning positions this past season. But they were pretty good in the first couple of months of the campaign and played some nice football along the way, scored a hell of a lot of goals. So there is a lot to like about him as a coach. Whether he's the right fit for QPR, I'm unsure, but I think he's definitely worth giving a chance to, put it that way.
Yeah, I think the goals thing is actually quite important. I know they conceded a fair few, but they came second to Leeds when it came to goals scored in the Championship this season, which is an incredible feat. It really, really is. I know he boasted a lot of good attacking players, but I think there's a manager there who wants to unlock the attacking potential in his team, and Marty Cifuentes probably sat on the pragmatist side of the fence. So we might see a little bit more excitement with QPR. We might do, and I think that's a positive thing.
Well, that's why I'm slightly unsure about whether he's the right fit for QPR, because I think it's a bit of a contrast to what Cifuentes was trying to do.
Yeah.
But
the thing is with Cifuentes, the important thing you got to note is that he tried to play a little bit more expansive and he couldn't. So actually, hopefully this prompts the club to go out and recruit players who can fit a system to ultimately get the best out of the squad.
A lot easier said than done, though, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
If Cifuentes was struggling to do it, then how well is Thorup going to implement it? We'll wait and see, won't we? But yeah, he's definitely worth a go as a manager. I've just got a few reservations, really, with various bits which I've just mentioned. The final team, Justin, before we have a quick break, is, of course, Sheffield United, who we know will be with us again next season after their defeat in the playoff final last weekend. What grade have you given them?
B for Blades.
I've gone B for Blades as well. It's a bit of a funny one, isn't it? Because I look at Sheffield United and for most of the season, they were definitely deserving of an A because they were in the top two at various stages of the season. They were top of the league despite having a 2-point deduction. Then everything went really wrong in the final month or two of the season. But considering they were appalling in the Premier League the season before, the one just gone, maybe an A would have been deserving for Sheffield United. But considering the season they've had and it's ended up with them not getting promoted, I think B is fair. Anything to say on that, Justin?
Well, yeah, there became a points deduction. They had ownership uncertainty. They rebuilt their squad and they accumulated 92 points this season. That's a really, really impressive thing to do. Ultimately, I think
92 points if you ignore the points deduction,
yeah.
Because I know people are going to start going, they only got 90 points just then.
Yeah,
so just saving you from the YouTube comments.
yeah. Whatever. But I think with that, the two moments where they really needed to knuckle down, they failed. That game against Oxford, that 3-game winless run, they failed. That's when the league was in their hands. And obviously the last 20 minutes of the playoff final, they failed. So it's a rough end to the season, but one that I hope really does springboard them forwards.
Well, we spoke at length about Sheffield United next season in last week's playoff final reaction episode, Justin, so we don't need to go over that again. But you have made it very clear you're feeling very confident about Sheffield United bouncing back. However, Gustavo Harmer has already been linked with a move away. TalkSport say Everton and Leeds are showing interest in him. So how much would your confidence be knocked in Sheffield United next season if they were to lose Harmer, Justin?
I would argue that losing Vinny Sousa would be worse for Sheffield United than it would be losing Gus Harmer.
I'm not sure I could disagree more with that statement, but go on.
Because of where Gus Harmer's been placed in the team and the role he's been made to fill, yes, his goals are important. Yes, his driving force is important. His quality is important. But I think with the fee that Sheffield United would get for him, I think you can recruit a player who can come in and deliver the same number of goal contributions that Gus Harmer did. With Vinny Sousa, I know he wants to be in Brazil's World Cup squad next year. So there's talk of him leaving. I think losing a shield like him and the role that he plays in the team is a much harder skill set to replace than Gus Hamer's.
Well, I'm not going to deny that Vinny Sousa is a very, very talented player. And for full disclosure, I was questioning whether Harmer should have won the Player of the Season and the official EFL Player of the Season for the Championship last season. But he is undeniably the kind of player who makes things happen. And he does that on a very regular basis. And the reason why I think he would be pretty much the worst player for Sheffield United to lose is because that kind of player is very hard to find at Championship level because he's got Premier League quality, and signing Premier League quality in the Championship is always going to be difficult. And the reason why I'm even hotter on Harmer being much more difficult to replace is because Sheffield United weren't the best in the final third last season anyway. Their top scorer was Tyrese Campbell with 11 goals. Next was Harmer with 10. After that was Jesron Raksaki with 7, and he was only on loan, so he's going as well. So they would be losing a lot of firepower and creativity when they don't really have it in abundance already. So I think that's pretty worrying. So that's another reason why I don't share your confidence in Sheffield United being as strong next season. And this would definitely not inspire confidence on my side of things either.
I think, yeah, it's a fair argument to make. Gus Harmer's a fantastic player, and I love him to bits. But as I say, I think the skill set that Vinny Sousa brings, the shield that he makes, the amount of ball recoveries he makes, he's the player that gets the ball into the Gus Hamers, the Ben Brereton Diaz's, the good attacking players, if you like. So without that type of player, I don't think Blades tick defensively or offensively as well as they did last season. So, like I said, I think with the fee that Hamer would bring in and potentially others, I think replacing goals is a much easier feat. You look at Leeds, Crescencio Somerville managed to replace him. Likewise with Jorginho Ruta. I know it's slightly different budget-wise, but it would give me the confidence that the Blades could do the same.
I think it's very different budget-wise, and I'm not sure Sheffield United will be able to recruit someone like Manor Solomon, put it that way. So that's why I would be worried if they lost Harmer. But it'll be interesting to monitor that one over the coming weeks. Justin, we'll have a quick break. After that, we'll go through the rest of the teams as we grade every side in the Championship from the past season. Welcome back to the Second Tier podcast. This is the final part of us ranking, or grading even, every team in the Championship from the past season and having a mini look ahead to next season. We've just done the red half of Sheffield, on to the blue half now. Justin, what grade have you given for Sheffield Wednesday?
Give them a C.
I've given them a C as well. I couldn't find myself going either way, to be honest, because considering they very nearly went down last season, a mid-table finish is good. Some were tipping them to maybe go even better this past season, but they finished mid-table in the end very comfortably. The C's fine.
Yeah, they never really threatened a top six push, nor were they ever in trouble of a relegation battle. I think if you break it down a little bit, their home record was incredibly poor, the second worst in the division, and obviously a lot of Chancery bother as well.
Yep.
But I think for Wednesday, finishing 12th is fine, but perhaps the highlight of the season, close your ears, Blades fans, was Sheffield United losing at Wembley in the 90th minute.
when that's your highlight of the season, yeah, maybe says a lot. But I do think it has been a good season on the pitch for Wednesday, but not for the first time. The off-the-pitch issues are threatening to ruin everything, as we've come accustomed to with ongoings at Hillsborough, because at the end of last season, it seemed almost certain that Danny Rule was going to be leaving Sheffield Wednesday. As we sit here now, he's still in charge, and the avenues for his departure seem to have closed off because he was being very strongly linked with Southampton, but they've gone for Will still. He was being linked with Leicester. They've looked elsewhere. Crystal Palace and Fulham were also said to be interested if they were to lose their managers this summer, but that doesn't seem to be happening now. So it looks like the last hope Danny Rule has of being freed from Hillsborough is if a Bundesliga club comes in for him, which may still happen. But Justin, put yourself in the shoes of Danny Rule. If no one came in for you, would you just walk away?
I think he's got grounds to walk away because of his relationship with Chancery. Obviously, I think from Chancery's point of view, he's got a position where he's either going to collect a lot of money for Danny Rule, or Danny Rule's just going to walk and he's not going to have to pay him off. Because obviously, if a manager resigns, you waive your right to a compensation fee, don't you? So that's the scenario that Chancery's got. It's a very tidy one. For Danny Rule, it's a bit shit because no one clearly wants to pay the excess millions that it's going to take to break him and his staff out of the contract. And obviously, yeah, he's in a position where he either carries on or he walks. So it's a weird scenario. I do feel for him because having a boss like Chancery must be really, really difficult. It must be hard. It must be gross and nasty to turn up to work every day.
Yeah, probably is. For context, for anyone who isn't aware, the rumoured compensation fee that a club would have to pay to get Danny Rule is thought to be around £5 million, which doesn't seem a lot in the grand scheme of, player transfers and what have you, but for a manager, that is an awful lot of compensation. And it's been well publicised that it seems to have put off a lot of clubs from actually pursuing him as a potential appointment. The situation is, it's quite clear he doesn't want to be there, though, because of the owner. From his own perspective, does he want to risk harming his own stock by sticking with a job he's not totally committed to? That's the question I would be asking here if I was Danny Rule. To be honest, I'm surprised he's not walked away already, because one of the big sticking points in him is obviously the compensation, as we say. But if he walks away, then there is no compensation. Unless there's some sort of clause in his contract stopping him from resigning, then I don't really see any reason why he would be sticking around, Justin, other than simply his respect for the fans and the players. But sometimes you've got to think about number one in this scenario, and number one's not very happy, as has been very evident.
Well, yeah, I think from a Wednesday fan's point of view, it must be, I won't say hurtful because it's probably not as severe as that, but the uncertainty they've got going into the season at a time when everyone wants to buy their season ticket as well, which is probably actually already
most expensive season tickets in the Championship as well, probably.
Yeah, when you've got a manager who is ultimately batting his eyelids at other clubs to come and rescue him from a very untenable position. As a supporter, what's your motivation to get behind your club? And unfortunately, it all roads point east, isn't it? It's Chancery. That's the problem. It's a difficult set of circumstances and probably the most unique in the Championship, that right now anyway. So, yeah, from Danny Rule's point of view, it'd be hard to walk away. But if no clubs come in for him, he's probably in a position where he's left where he has to.
He's going to get another job, isn't he, if he does walk anytime soon? Because as soon as a Championship job or Premier League job becomes available, teams will be sniffing around him, or a Bundesliga job, as we say. So, yeah, it's a very strange position that he's in, but I don't think any Sheffield Wednesday fan would be particularly blaming him if he did decide to go, because they all know the owner's an absolute nightmare. Let's go to Stoke City. Justin, what grade have you given them?
I've given them an E.
E feels somewhat harsh. I've gone with a D, because I think it's been an underwhelming season again from a Stoke City perspective. It's not been a disastrous one, though, question mark.
I think F would mark a disaster, wouldn't it? But I think give them an E. I think D is actually very generous. I think a Stoke team that have spent heavily in the last 2 years just missing out on a relegation in the final game of the season, I think is as close to awful as you can possibly get. The budget and value of this squad is so significant. They should not be battling close to relegation fodder. I know. Stoke tax.
Stoke tax. You forgot about the Stoke tax.
Stoke tax. But look, I think the last few months can actually paper over what has been 3 managers in a season. 3 managers.
Yep.
Narcis Palach, who I keep forgetting exists. This only happened in October. And obviously Steven Schumacher as well. I think it is just about right. I think D is very generous. I think this season has been terrible, terrible, terrible. You cannot, if you try and justify it any higher than terrible, you're gaslighting yourself.
Stoke tax, though, Justin. It's not surprising, unfortunately, with Stoke City at this stage. And Justin, we've constantly said Stoke are a club circling the drain in the Championship. Let me read out their last 4 league finishes for you. 14th, 16th, 17th, and now 18th. Seems to be a trend developing here, Justin, and they seem to be getting closer and closer to that plug hole that they've been circling for a while.
Yeah, and before Stoke fans come at us, Cardiff City. That's it. There's your example. There's your sample size. I am nervous about Stoke. I still think the squad is shockingly unbalanced. It relied so heavily on loan signings last year to prop them up. And, I alluded to spending. When a club has spent as much money as they have, and Stoke have spent considerably for Championship standards, they're still needing to borrow quality to prop the squad up. Tom Cannon left in January. He was recalled, and Al Hamidi came in. And like I said, they're still relying on loan players, despite spending excess millions on the likes of Ryan Nemai and others. It's just a ridiculous scenario that they found themselves in. It really, really is. And the long-term planning worries me. There isn't any. New recruitment team again. Mark Robinson's got a pre-season. We've been here before.
Yeah, we have been here before with the team you mentioned just a second ago, Cardiff City, because as they found out this past season, if you circle the drain for too long, you will go down it eventually. Is that going to be Stoke next season? Why wouldn't it? What they need is someone to almost single-handedly drag them in the right direction. And plenty of managers have come in over the past few years to try and do that, and no one has had any form of success. Even Mark Robbins, based off what he did last season, it would seem like the answer is no to whether he's the person to drag them in the right direction. Is John Walters, the sporting director, the man to do that? Well, considering he dubiously sacked Steven Schumacher after just a handful of games into last season to get his own man in, who was then sacked himself after 3 months, throwing some very sketchy recruitment along the way. No, it doesn't seem like Walters is going to turn things around either. So it won't be at all surprising if next season is the one where they finally go down, particularly when the squad is looking weaker now than it has done ever since they got relegated from the Prem. So, yeah, not ideal. The big question is, Justin, are you going to overrate them again in August when we start making our predictions for the new season? Because it's a mistake you seem to make every single year.
Absolutely.
I'm being deadly serious here. Don't do it, Justin, because it's going to piss me off so much if you turn around in 2 months' time and say, I think Stoke could be a dark horse next season. I will shove that microphone down your throat.
Yeah, well, when they sign a centre half that we like and they go out and sign a striker, that would probably sign Kiefer Moore or something. I'd be like, you know what? This is their year.
No. Just learn. You've got to learn, for God's sake, every single year. And he still falls for it. You were so strong on it last August as well. I was like, Justin, stop.
Well, yeah, you can say that, but Steven Schumacher had them in the top half. That's all I'll say.
After, 6 games?
It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Next club, please.
Next club is Sunderland. What grade are you giving them, Justin?
Oh, F. What a terrible season. Awful. Come on.
I've gone with an A star. Justin sticking with an F. So that you at him on Twitter, ladies and gentlemen. I've gone with an A star because I think Sunderland may have actually been the big winners of this past season, Justin.
Absolutely. Very few fancied them. They made big changes. They took massive risks. They have a
just for clarity, what's your actual grade?
A star. A star. Yeah. There's no other way of describing it. But as I was saying, big changes, big risks. A vastly inexperienced squad, the least experienced squad in the league. So what they achieved is just incredible. How they achieved it as well needs to be mentioned because they were in the conversation for the automatics for 2/3 of the season. I know they dropped off. I know they had an awful run of form going into the playoffs. But they, as I say, they were in the conversation for automatics until February, and then that was all packaged together on the fraction of a cost of the squad of Sheffield United, Leeds, and Burnley as well. So look, biggest winners without a doubt this season.
Yeah, I think you've got to say Sunderland have been the big winners of this past season because in an era where most of the promotion places are taken up by newly relegated sides from the Premier League or recently relegated sides from the Premier League, Sunderland have shown that if you're smart with the way you go about things and have a philosophy that you stick to, you can still get promoted. That's a big lesson for all clubs in the Championship. Yes, it takes a lot of work, but look at it now. Sunderland are reaping the rewards, aren't they? Ultimately, you've got to remember, you're never going to outspend a team coming down from the Premier League. So you need to outdo them by being savvy. And that's what Sunderland have done. That's what Ipswich did. That's what Luton did. That's what Brentford did. It's the only way teams in this modern day Championship are going to get promoted now if they haven't been in the Premier League in the past couple of seasons. Everyone needs to take note. Everyone needs to learn from what Sunderland have done. And even though Sunderland are still celebrating their miraculous achievement, they may be about to suffer a fairly big setback, Justin. That's because they could reportedly lose Joe Bellingham this summer. He's said to have held talks with clubs in Germany this past week over a potential move, but it's also been reported that Sunderland owner Kirill Louis-Dreyfus is determined to keep a hold of him. I had been saying that I thought whether Sunderland went up or not, they're probably going to lose Job because he's always going to be a very sought-after player. I suppose the question is, Justin, what do you think would be best for his career? Stay at Sunderland or go elsewhere?
I think firstly, are we not ruling out Joe Bellingham just going interrailing? Can a man not interrail anymore across Europe?
What?
Interrailing. Have you never heard that?
What's that?
Interrailing is when you travel across Europe on trains.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
what's that got to do with him moving potentially?
Well, there's having discussions with the German clubs, basically. Germany would be my first destination interrailing, so it might be Joe Bellingham's as well. More to the point that you were making, for me, Joe Bellingham, I think putting my cold economic brain on, a move would probably suit all parties, him leaving. I know he's a talented player, and I know Sunderland are going to get a pretty penny for him. And I know there's the emotional connection of him being at the club as well, but unfortunately, this was always the pathway for Bellingham II, wasn't it?
Yeah. And you know what? I agree with you. I think the sad reality is that it's probably best for all parties that they sell now. The reason I say that is because, unfortunately, with how big the gap is between the Championship and the Premier League, it's more likely than not that Sunderland will get hammered in most weeks in the Prem. Sunderland fans who I've spoken to completely understand that may very well be the case. And you've got to ask, is Bellingham going to develop more as a player when he's getting spanked every week in the Prem or while he's playing for one of the better teams in the Bundesliga? You say it's more likely to be the latter, wouldn't you? But then also from a Sunderland perspective, with a financial brain or financial hat firmly on my head, is his stock going to be higher now in 12 months' time after he's been in the side, which has lost most weeks? You'd say it's more likely to be now. Do you see what I mean? And yeah, I get it. While romantically, you want to see these Sunderland players step up to the Premier League with them. unfortunately, from a business perspective, it makes more sense to sell. Plus, I don't know what the PSR situation is, but it certainly won't be a bad thing if you sell a lad you got for £3 million for, 30 plus million, maybe even more than that. So it'd be nice to keep him, but my head is very much saying sell when it comes to Joe Bellingham, unfortunately. Let's move on just into Swansea City. What grade are you giving them?
Give them a C.
I'm giving them a C as well. Don't really have much else to add with Swansea. Very mid-table finish for a very mid-table side.
Yeah. I think, in terms of how the season's progressed, I do still feel a little bit for Luke Williams. But I think the opportunity Alan Sheehan's got, I'm very excited by, because he's a coach that I do highly rate. Will Luke Williams have delivered a mid-table finish? Potentially. I think there's good chances that he would have got them out of that losing run that they were on. But ultimately, I think until Swansea is settled upstairs, in the boardroom, it's going to be really hard to see them actually push higher than where they are at the moment.
Well, that brings me nicely on to looking ahead to next season, Justin, because this has been sort of an end of an era sort of season with Bristol City and Preston, two sides who usually always sit in the middle of the table, going their separate ways in quite dramatic fashion. That brings me on to the question, are Swansea now the head representatives of mid-table mediocrity in the Championship? Because they've had 4 seasons in a row where they finished between 10th and 15th. And I would say they emit far more mid-table energy than any other side in the division at this stage. What do you think?
Yeah, they're head of the table, aren't they? Head of the mid-table, if you like. I think actually to do that, I do think it's actually an achievement that probably will get overlooked, mainly because they have some of the most clumsiest owners, I think, in probably in the country. And what I mean by clumsy is the previous owners weren't awful, but it felt like they never understood the club, what it stood for and what it meant to the fans, and ultimately never put things in place for growth. So for them to avoid stagnating and dropping like a stone, I do actually think is an achievement. I know you're not going to put it on a plaque and put it in your office, but for Swansea to still be a mid-table team, I do think is an achievement.
Achievement feels like a strong word. Not failing is not an accomplishment in my eyes, but stabilising yourself as a mid-table championship side is good, depending on which way you look at it, I guess. But when you go through every other team in the division, I find it difficult to confidently pick out many other sides who I think will also be finishing in the mid-table area next season. Obviously, other teams have to finish there, so someone will. But I just look at Swansea and they seem too good to go down, but lacking enough to properly challenge for the playoffs. Everything seems to be pretty stable behind the scenes. I just find myself struggling to get excited with them now. 6 months ago, I was quite excited about them because they were going pretty well under Luke Williams, but now he's obviously gone. We've got Alan Sheehan, who did well as the caretaker. Unclear whether that will continue as the permanent manager going forwards. They've also lost some big players from last season. They're pretty steady with their recruitment, so I assume they'll replace who they've lost, but it feels like a transition season for Swansea, Justin. The issue is, it feels like the last 4 seasons have also been transition seasons, so it's a lot of transitioning going on at Swansea.
Yeah, the longest transition known to man, actually, isn't it? But again, I think that's down to them having really, really just owners who just don't get it. Do you know what I mean? I think that's what I was alluding to. So yes, they are still in transition, but the squad probably last summer was propped up nicely. And if you have another summer like they had last year, then maybe they can reach higher. But ultimately, it's really hard to see them pulling out until we see... I don't know what we need to see, actually, to convince us that Swansea are going to push higher. Maybe we've just been dragged into this sense of, no, they're just mid-table fodder, unfortunately.
Well, who knows? Maybe the form that we saw from Alan Sheehan when he was a caretaker is a sign that he is a really, really good coach. And next season, they may have one of those seasons where they kind of just come out of nowhere and are really, really good, actually. You can't really say for sure because we don't really know much about Alan Sheehan as a manager. But that squad is looking a bit underwhelming at the moment. Yeah, there are some talented players in there, but I think it needs a lot of work if it is going to seriously challenge for the playoffs going forward. So there's work to do. We can say that much. but Swansea have spent a lot of the past 6 months getting their ducks in a row with the takeover that happened around autumn time. So when they've done that, maybe they can start properly building towards making them a force in this division again. But right now, yeah, a lot of mid-table energy coming from Swansea, far more than any other team in the Championship nowadays, which is a shame because we used to have that mid-table, kind of stalwarts, for the lack of a better term. And now they've all gone, which is a shame. Swansea pretty much the last one standing in that regard. Let's go to Watford. Justin, what grade are you giving them?
Giving them a B.
I've given them a B. I may have gone with an A if the run of form towards the end of the season didn't happen, because they were fighting for, or at least having a bit of a flirt with the playoff places for large parts of the season, weren't they? So a B is probably fair. Justin, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, it was pretty much top 6 form in the first half of the season and bottom 3 form in the second half of the season. It all comes down to Tom Cleverley, doesn't it? The squad that they've got, they should be further down the table than the 11th. So I think, despite Gino Pozzo's poor decision, he probably owes Tom Cleverley a lot of drinks, actually, because Watford could well have been a League One club if it wasn't for old Clevs.
Well, there's still time yet, mate. Because let's talk about next season. I'm personally finding it difficult to see Watford replicating a mid-table finish next season, Justin, because unless the new manager, Paulo Pezzolano, is a very good manager, everything else about them is pointing towards a season of struggle, from my point of view. Definitely not the playoff-chasing season that Watford's owners are expecting, based off the statements they put out when they sacked Tom Cleverley.
Yeah, well, I think we're still very early on in the summer for us to really assess them. But I think, if the new manager is going to come in and actually be a success, and this is what we were saying when Tom Cleverley was sacked, the squad needs really, really propping up with quality. I think the biggest point you can make about that is Tom Cleverley got 8 goals out of Edu Kayembe and double figures from Vikun Bayo. That's an astonishing achievement. And also it highlights the shortfalls in the squad that Cleverley was working with. So I think the signings, Kiprial from Peterborough come in on a Bosman. That's a weird way of saying it. No one said Bosman anymore, but he's coming in on a free transfer. I actually think that's a very tidy signing. More additions like that, I think, can go a long way into making this Watford squad quality. But as you say, the uncertainty with the new manager does add uncertainty to, for use of better terms.
It sounds like, from what you're saying, I think you are underestimating how weak this squad is, because if it wasn't for the brilliant leadership of Tom Cleverley, which got them fighting well above their level, then they would have been in serious, serious danger of going down last season. And now he's gone. That weak squad is not looking as threatening, for the lack of a better term. And they've already seen players leave. If they lose Georgi Chakvetadze or Imran Lauza, maybe a couple of others, I would be fearing for them. They have signed Hector Cipriano from Peterborough, who looks a decent pickup on a free transfer, will add a bit of steel in midfield. And if they sign well in the summer, then maybe we'll be wrong, and maybe they will have another solid mid-table finish, or maybe even challenging for the playoffs. But they're one of many clubs who look like they're having to work with limited resources because their owners don't want to spend money. And I'm also looking at it and thinking, if Pezzolano doesn't pull a rabbit out of the hat and have Watford challenging for the playoffs, then he'll probably get sacked, because that's what the owners have publicly said, that they're expecting this coming season. If he isn't doing what Tom Cleverley was trying to do last season, or was nearly accomplishing last season, then he's underachieving in the eyes of the Pozzos, which is mad when they're giving him absolutely zero backing based off the amount of money they've put into the squad in the past few seasons. So it's a pretty mental scenario, actually, Justin.
Well, it's Watford, isn't it? So nothing goes the way it should.
Nothing surprising with Watford ever, really, is it?
Nothing goes the way it should. But like I said, whether Petzolano is a success or not is another story, but he needs to be backed. If he isn't, this team will finish mid-table, lower mid-table, nothing higher. They're probably 6 or 7 players short, I think, of potentially pushing for the playoffs, and that's without considering the improvement and heightened competitiveness of the Championship coming into the season. Watford are playing catch-up. There are a lot of teams ahead of them at the moment.
Well, Birmingham and Wrexham coming into the league pushes a lot of teams down the pecking order, doesn't it, as far as I'm concerned? You've got your scepticism about Wrexham, which we'll talk about on Thursday. But yeah, that's something to definitely keep in mind. And the final club we'll give a grade to from the past season, Justin, is, of course, West Bromwich Albion. I was between a C and a D. I'm looking at, I put a D down, but I'm looking at them finishing ninth. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh with that. What did you go with?
No, I went with D. I think a C would be really, really... no, actually, now I'm thinking about it out loud. Maybe a C might be fine.
Yeah.
Because for them to finish in the top six amidst all the uncertainty would have been a very, very good season. A B-level season. But I think maybe just the disappointment in how the season just petered out maybe has pushed them down to a D for me. I don't know. It's a C-D scenario, but I don't think you can really mask over, the feeling of it being a disappointing campaign for them.
Well, West Brom are one of the many clubs on the lookout for a new manager this summer, which I nearly forgot about. There's so many clubs who that are on the lookout for a manager that I almost forgot which ones do need a manager, and West Brom is one of them, if I'm being honest. But it seems like their choice is Tottenham coach Ryan Mason. What do you think to that, Justin?
I'm intrigued because he falls into the category of, he's been linked with a lot of jobs, but he's never made the leap. And, he's a young coach. Obviously, I know he had to retire early because of his head injury, but I think what that lends to is, a lot of experience from a coaching point of view, which he's probably got more experience than some managers in the Championship going into next season, from a coach's perspective. But, West Brom... They're turning into a project club. You look at the likes of John Swift, Graydon Dean Garner, big earning players have now left West Brom. They're almost starting again squad-wise. So actually, I think for a manager who is young and inexperienced, like Ryan Mason coming in, it's probably not a bad role to take. So I'm intrigued and not excited by it, mainly because it's hard to really pick out when they've got no experience to fall back on. But he's a highly rated coach, and why not? Why not get excited by it?
You say he's a young coach, Justin. He's basically a baby by managerial standards. I was stunned to find out he's only 33. He retired such a long time ago that I'd assumed he was older, but it would make him the fourth youngest permanent manager in Championship history, which is some going, isn't it? But yeah, I'm always a big ambassador for giving coaches a chance in management. There's a lot of very talented coaches out there who are just waiting for their opportunity. And if it works out, you get yourself a very talented young coach, often for very little. You look at Kieran McKenna, Steve Cooper, Danny Rule, Enzo Maresca. They're examples of what can happen when you just give a coach a chance. And Ryan Mason may be next in line in those long list of managers or coaches who have turned into really good managers. On the spin side, it can go very wrong. Narcis Palach at Stoke, Omar Reitzer at Cardiff, Ian Foster at Plymouth, Joe Edwards at Millwall. Maybe Ryan Mason will be one of them. We just don't know. But we will never find out unless he gets given a chance. And ultimately, what have West Brom got to lose? Because they're not going to go down. It looks like they will need to have a bit of a gamble if they're going to get a playoff place next season, because as we've talked about constantly, it's looking like an extremely competitive season coming up in the Championship. Mason seems like a gamble worth taking, so why not, I say?
Yeah, there's an opportunity to build there, isn't it? Because as I said, there's a lot of players leaving. It gives Ryan Mason a bit more of a blank canvas. It gives the club a bit more of a blank canvas and probably a healthier budget, or a more balanced budget, to actually really start to make a mark. And we saw recruitment change with Isaac Price coming in. Obviously, they're trying to favour young players with potential to grow, which they haven't really attempted in recent years. So as I say, when they're signing young players, perhaps a young manager coming in, it fits the bill nicely. But I think Ryan Mason, like I said, he's been in the coaching realm for a long time. He deserves an opportunity. And if it is him in the dugout of the Hawthorns, then we look at it with intrigue. Like Tom Cleverley did a really good job at Watford. Why can't Ryan Mason do the same at West Brom?
Why not? Why not, Justin? That's the question you've got to ask yourself. So yeah, give him a chance, and we'll see what happens, because why not, as we keep saying. But ladies and gentlemen, this has been us grading every team's past season and having a brief look ahead to next season. But if you're a Patreon subscriber, don't go anywhere. We've got the extended edition of the weekend show coming up, which we like to call Zamora Time. We'll be talking about which grade from these past 2 episodes we think is the most outrageous, and the former Premier League defender who he crossed paths with last weekend. If you're not a Patreon subscriber, sign up to get Zamora Time in every single weekend show. Head over to patreon.com/second tier. Link is in the description of this episode. We'll next be back on Thursday, where we'll be doing a deep dive into the newly relegated and promoted teams to the Championship next season, and have an early look ahead to what they could be doing next season, which is going to be very exciting because, as I said at the top of Thursday's episode, basically the most interesting set of new teams we've ever had coming into a Championship season, pretty much, aren't they? So make sure you stay with us for that. But this has been the Second Tier Podcast. I've been Ryan Dilks.
I've been Justin Peach.
And a big thank you for listening.